Hello and a warm welcome to another episode of EKONID's podcast series. My name is Jan Rönnfeld and I'm here to host the latest chapter of From the Archipelago. The year 2025 looks like a very challenging year. Locally, the government of President Prabowo has the pressure of delivering critical yet costly reforms, such as the promised free meals food program, the general on food security, on inflation reduction, and energy transition. On the global stage, the rather aggressive trade policies and the negative impact of the Trump presidency, as well as economic difficulties in China, clouding Indonesia's growth potential. Under these circumstances, how does Indonesia's economic outlook look like for 2025? Today, we are honored to have with us Professor Bambang Brodjonegoro, the former Minister of Finance and Chairman of BAPPENAS, currently an economic advisor to President Prabowo and a member of our advisory board. Bambang, please, how does the outlook look for Indonesia in 2025?
Okay. Thank you, Jan. And of course, we have to start with what happened at the last quarter of 2024. Why? Because, as you know, President Prabowo was inaugurated in October 2024, and at least there were about almost 3 months until the end of 2024. Looking at 2024 first, then we can see that we had some challenges, especially on the second half of 2024. The first half of 2024 was actually quite okay because our growth at the first quarter, 5.11%, which is quite unusual because a little bit above 5%, but bit slowed down, but still above 5% in second quarter, 5.05%. But then in the third quarter, we had some alarm, because our growth was only 4.95%. And simply because the consumption growth at that time is only 4.9%. So clearly our economy is still driven by the consumption growth, not so much on the investment growth. And I think this is the first area needs to be watched for 2025. If the investment cannot grow bigger than, let's say, in 2024, then it will be hard in 2025. What happened in 2025? First, size of our middle class declining. Number one, because of the COVID. The impact of COVID still not yet 100% recover. So we have issues from the COVID. Plus, of course, there was at that time high food inflation combined with the rupiah weakening against US dollar. So as a result, the purchasing power of middle class declining, and some of the middle class even degraded into the aspiring middle class level, and some of aspiring even going deeper into the so-called near poor. So that's the kind of situation for 2025. But at the same time, of course, there is a hope because this is new government, and currently the government might still enjoy the so-called honeymoon period of first 100 days. And the big challenge and also the thing that people going to watch is whether the government can really implement their main priority program. Those programs, number one, you already mentioned about a free school meal, or we call it free nutritious meal. And then the second one, the 3 million housing units. And then some other program related to both education and health. So the good thing about what Pak Prabowo did, at least on the first 3 months, is trying to emphasize more on development of human resources. Something that may be not getting too much attention on the previous one. Of course, there has been, allocation, for example, 20% of the budget for education, I think 5% for health. But we know that not emphasizing too much on human resources, I think will be quite disturbing for our ambition to be high-income country by 2045, or the so-called Golden Indonesia 2045. Trying to answer your question, what will be the outlook of 2025 in terms of economic growth, I might see that there could be some recovery on the consumption growth, but not so much. I mean, there could be some of the middle income level getting back to their original position, but maybe still some of them still behind. So most likely in terms of economic growth, it will be still around 5%, but maybe there is a risk that we might have growth slightly lower than 5%. Usually, whenever we are talking about 5%, 5 point something. But this time around, especially 2025, then we have to watch whether it will be 5 point something or 4.90 something. So this is the thing that we have to watch. Of course, the global issues not really helping so much. I mean, aside from global economic weakening, we have to watch what Trump is really going to do. Of course, he already has some rhetorics that trying to emphasize on, making America great again, America first. But when it comes to reality, I still believe there could be some adjustment, from the rhetoric that already said at the beginning. But of course, he already imposed, for example, high tariff for China, Mexico, and Canada. So maybe Indonesia can take advantage by trying to manage the trade deficit. Because why those three countries? Because U.S. against those three countries, unfortunately, had maybe relatively high trade deficit. That's why they got the first treatment to get the higher tariff. Okay. So, at least with this new government, effort to maintain 5% or a little bit more would be the biggest challenge they have to face on the very first year of this current government.
Yeah, and 5% is much less what the president, I would not say promised, but tried to mentioned at least during the election campaign that his target is to have 8%. Is there any chance to go in that direction, or what would have to be done other than maybe global circumstances improving? Is there anything on the local policy level that could be done to raise that? I mean, how to reduce inflation is, I think, which is one part of why the middle class is declining. But how can they compensate for that?
Yeah, I think ideas of having economic growth higher than 5% already becoming like so-called the dream for many Indonesians. Because if we look at the data, then on the last 10 to 15 years, the average is 5%.
5%, which is quite good, by the way.
Well, it's quite good. I mean, even now among G20 members, we usually rank either number 2 or number 3. We only usually compete with either China or India. So yes, it is good and it is stable, because macroeconomic stability will always be one of the so-called the top priority for Indonesia investment attractiveness, aside from the size of our market. But stability, of course, cannot be described only stabilizing the growth itself. You mentioned about inflation, for example. I think we have done quite well in that department. I mean, trying to maintain inflation. So currently we have inflation 2 to 3%. But then when you look into inflation, yes, you have to be very careful when you look the component of the inflation. Because in inflation, you might have core inflation, which is basically the general pattern of the price increase, which is usually very stable. It's always monitored by the central bank. But you also have the inflation coming from the administered price, government administered price. So it might create high inflation if government, let's say, adjusts the fuel subsidy. And last but not least, and it is now the most critical, is the so-called volatile food inflation, especially on rice. So that's why on the very first months of Pak Prabowo's cabinet, the emphasis is the food security. When you are talking about food security in Indonesia, it's basically rice security. And we are talking about rice security, you cannot rely by saying, okay, don't worry, we can fulfill the demand of rice locally just buying import, It won't work politically and also economically. That's why the production side becomes very important and becoming, again, one of the very first priorities during Pak Prabowo's government. There might be some ways to increase the production, but the message has to be quite clear. Indonesia needs to maintain food security by maintaining inflation. And by maintaining inflation means that you have to also pay attention to the production side of the commodity itself. So talking about the commodity, this is the reason why we have been stuck around 5%. Our economy, despite our industrialization back in 1990s, unfortunately still commodity-driven. You are talking about coal, you are talking about palm oil, lately you are talking about nickel. And then, unfortunately, our manufacturing experienced the decline in its contribution to the GDP. In 1990s, almost 30%, like other Asian tigers at the time. But today, it's only 19%. So it means, in order to have economic growth higher than 5% and hopefully could be 8%, then manufacturing or what I call reindustrialization has to be on the top list. So when you are talking about reindustrialization, then you have to select which type of industrial product you like to emphasize or you like to prioritize. Of course, you cannot go back to the 1990s experience when Indonesia at that time is quite dominating globally for labor-intensive manufacturing, garment, textile, footwear, electronics. So we have to find other type of products that could be so-called Indonesia's advantage in the global market. Indonesia's, uniqueness or attractiveness in the global market. You might try to follow, for example, the example from Japan, Korea, and could be also Germany, automotive and electronics. Those countries, especially Japan and Korea, are very superior in that area, and that makes them becoming a high-income country. But I don't think that could be the case for Indonesia. I'm not saying that Indonesia doesn't want to compete with others, but we have to be realistic. And when it comes to realistic, we have to identify what will be our advantage in resources. Clearly, still natural resources. But then natural resources will not give you high value added. You might get some good compensation for extracting the natural resources, or you planting the trees and everything. So you have to create value added from your natural resources through manufacturing process. That's why one of the Pak Prabowo's priority is, in Bahasa is called hilirisasi. In English, maybe the English version is downstreaming. But if you are not familiar with downstreaming, creating value added from your natural resources could be one of the solutions to have our economic growth on average higher than 5%. I'm not talking about 8% right away because there is still process. But in order to have higher economic growth, then clearly you have to do the so-called economic transformation. And that has to also utilize your natural resources, but you have to create value added for that. And to summarize what I'm trying to do about increasing 5% economic growth, whenever you are trying to increase the value added of your natural resources, then you need technology. You cannot stay away from technology. And in fact, based on the last World Development Report produced by the World Bank, middle income trap happens when a country is not really adapting well to the latest technological development or didn't do anything to do innovation on technology. So the keyword innovation on technology related to the value-added creation of natural resources might be one way to find a solution to bring our economic growth higher than 5%.
How do you see the role of countries like Germany or you mentioned Japan or Korea in that process? How can they play a role, can take part in that growth story?
Yeah. I think when we are talking about Germany, then maybe we can check what Indonesian people are familiar with any Germany-related stuff. Of course, maybe on their top of mind, Mercedes, BMW, I mean automotive, one thing. And also talking about some medicine product, talking about electronics, Siemens and everything. So at the end, Germany is very much close to the advancement and superiority in manufacturing. That's number one. So what we can learn from Germany and what Germany companies can do more investment in Indonesia has to be related to number one, manufacturing, and number two, the technology. Of course, we remember our late President Habibie. He was German education, but more importantly, what he brought from Germany is the technology, and plus, of course, the R&D behind the technology itself. I think this is the area that German companies should take a look in Indonesia. So, Indonesia is still very much hungry for manufacturing, and we want to have a good position in any manufacturing product globally. And then we know that in order to win globally, to be competitive globally, you cannot stay away from technology. At least you have to be able to adopt the technology in your production. And of course, related to the idea of downstreaming or the creating value added, you need to do innovation. And I know very well during my days as Minister of Research and Technology, whenever I visited any lab, belongs to the ministry or belongs to the university, majority of equipment made in Germany. So maybe Germany is not involved directly with the innovation in technology, but we have to adopt the way Germany trying to do the innovation. Because I believe the only way Germany can maintain its competitiveness in the global economy is through R&D innovation. So we hope that any German companies, especially the ones that have interest to invest in Indonesia, not only talking about how to, let's say, position the manufacturing activities in Indonesia, but more importantly, they are also doing, hopefully, the kind of product development through R&D in Indonesia. I remember when I was still at the middle school, we got the news that Brazil, at that time, had been able to be the source of Volkswagen manufacturing. I think one type of Volkswagen. And I think this is the type that Indonesia maybe should look for. Maybe it was a long time ago, but we can do with other products from Germany. So maybe the technology is still in Germany, but at least the site of manufacturing factories in Indonesia. And later, after we are quite, doing well with the manufacturing, why don't we move forward with the product development through R&D? So at the end, at least Indonesia will be familiar with the idea of product development through R&D done by the private sector. Because in Indonesia, whenever you are talking about R&D, people top of mind will look for, is there government budget for that? As if the R&D can only be done by the government. It won't work for any developed country. Any advancement in R&D could be initiated by the government, but it has to be further developed or accelerated by the private sector.
Yeah, right. We haven't talked about the service sector.
Yeah.
I mean, as a German living in Indonesia and living in Jakarta, I always try to describe Indonesia as a service paradise.
Yeah.
if you are living here, you have a very high level of service quality, and is that something the government has in mind? Maybe also to help companies to export their services like other companies.
Yeah, I think services, especially now related to digital services, becoming one of the so-called hot property in Indonesia business. In fact, we have witnessed many emergence as well as downfall of our startup. But I think it's a good way. Yes, it's a shame that some of them cannot continue their business, but that's how business is supposed to be. You have to try. You might be successful, but sometimes you fail, but you can get up back again into a successful companies. So when it comes to the service sector, yes, if we look at the latest data of our sectoral economic growth, it was quite clear that the highest growth actually enjoyed by the sectors called transportation and warehousing. It's basically the services. So how can we, let's say, combine the German experience, German advancement with this potential of transportation and warehousing? First, why transportation and warehousing recording highest growth? From warehousing side, simply because e-commerce has basically quite, substituting the retail, as the way of people doing their retail business. That's why when some of our big shopping mall suddenly becomes like a ghost building because not many stores still stay in that mall, but at the same time, warehousing is everywhere. So I think it's a good sign. Plus, of course, the logistic. I think we have been trying to improve our logistics scheme, and warehousing is part of our logistics system. But then on the transportation, certainly because after COVID, especially people really like to travel here and there, and we have the fast train. We have now in Jakarta, especially, we have more subway. We have LRT. So people already have their lifestyle, have changed their lifestyle, and they are trying to adjust with that. So how to combine the German experience, German expertise with this phenomena? I think it's quite clear. Whenever it comes to transportation, we need the mode of transportation itself. And I think Germany is in very good position. So you don't have to go really into the service itself, but you can go with the system, combining the vehicle, for example, the train, with your system in either fast train or in the subway. I think, yes, we have the first fast train from China, but I think Indonesia is quite open for any other technology, not only in fast train, but also in the subway. So I think that's how the German advancement in technology can really support our services sector. Plus, of course, if there are good application of digital services, I think, Indonesian people really like to try and, let's say, consume any new stuff in digital. Remember when Spotify, becomes quite popular? It's because people like to try how we can listen to the song whenever we are, wherever we are. You don't have to be in front of the sound system or the recorder in order to do that. Same with how Netflix becomes quite popular in Indonesia. And suddenly, Indonesian also trying to make the platform like Netflix, for example. So I think the opportunity is big, and the good thing about the Indonesian, number one, we have young population because we are experiencing demographic bonus. And this young population are, in terms of their digital literacy, I think is quite high. Although sometimes they are not very careful, but at least their enthusiasm to understand about digital technology, I think, is quite strong. That will be a good market, and at the same time, there is room for development of our digital services itself.
At the end, maybe asking a question a little bit more on the global aspects. The last government under President Jokowi was starting to apply for the membership of the OECD.
OECD, yeah.
For many, or for some observers, a little bit surprising, Indonesia now signed up to the Brics country. First, is that contradictive, or is it a shift in policy, or is that something which is just a natural balancing act of Indonesia? And how do you see the impact? What does the Indonesian government combines with that?
I'm not political expert as well as not international relation expert, but as an Indonesian, we remember very well our so-called foreign political stance, in which even since President Sukarno, the so-called non-aligned or neutral position of Indonesia, I think, is a key. In fact, it was quite amplified in our constitution. So, by doing that, of course, there could be some, dynamism when, for example, during the latest years of President Sukarno, he was leaning more to the China at that time and trying to set up, I think, getting out of UN at that time. But during Suharto, I think many people already identified that on the first half of Suharto, Indonesia is very close to the Western world, But I think on the second half of Suharto, for example, the relation with the Western was not as strong on compared to the first half. Okay, and after that we have, of course, experiencing the democratic era of our government, but whatever the system that applies, whether democratic or authoritarian, and whoever becoming the president, I think the non-aligned position is always maintained. And I think trying to read why Indonesia finally applying to be the member of BRICS is trying to maintain the balance between the Western world, which is already represented by OECD. And we are, because as a former finance minister, I had the first-hand experience coming to the OECD, doing presentation, meeting with all the delegation. And whenever you are in OECD headquarters in Paris, then you feel that Indonesia has to be like them, Indonesia has to be an advanced economy. And I think good motivation, although I know it's very tough and very rigid, to trying to comply with all OECD standard, norm, and regulation, but you have to do that. Because in general, nothing's wrong with compare with, let's say, the basic theory of economics, for example, in general. But at the same time, you have to look at the reality. When you check the data of our export as well as import, let's focus on our export. At least on the top 5 of the export destination countries from Indonesia, China is still at the top. India rising quite quickly, while at the same time, Japan was there, US was there, and ASEAN was also around. So if we are trying to enlarge our export target, then clearly you have to be quite close to those countries. And don't forget, as I mentioned before, China and India always have maybe the highest growth among the big economies around the world. So that's the good market is there. 1.5 billion people each, in those two countries. So we cannot avoid those countries. And we are not in the position, for example, like US that can treat China whatever they like. We are not in the position. So we have to be friendly with them. We have to really utilize their capacity to absorb our product. And at the same time, we also need to learn why Japan becoming advanced economy, Korea, what I heard, has the world record of how fast a country from middle income becoming high income, And at the same time, we have learned from very major market in Western Europe, in US. So we need to learn from them. But at the same time, we have to maintain our market. And the market now basically dominated by the Brics members. Yes, Russia, China. Maybe our export to Russia is not big, but they are still quite big market. So we still have the potential. So Russia, China, India, and Brazil. So I think from economic point of view, then this is our way to maintain the variety of export destination country. Yeah.
Maybe the last question from my side or for today is, where do you see Indonesia in the next 5, 10 years or even 20 years?
Yeah. I was fortunate back in 2018. I was assigned by President Jokowi to prepare the first draft of Indonesia 2045. At the time, we just called it Indonesian Vision 2045. And by doing that, then at least I understand in general what will be the push factor as well as the pull factor. And looking at the 5 to 10 years ahead, this first 5 years, 2025, 2029, will be the most critical one. Because we are now entering into what we call long-term planning. Our long-term planning is 20 years planning. 20 years planning, 2025, 2045. It means we have 20 years to prepare ourselves, getting out of, we are now in upper middle income. How can we go into the high income economy? So the first 5 years is important because this first 5 years will determine whether the high income country 2045 will still be achievable or not. So that's why one of Pak Prabowo's ambition is to have economic growth of 8%, because he knows very well that if we are stuck only with 5%, then there will be difficult, to be high income country in 2045. So back to your question, in 2029, 5 or 10 years from now, I believe we might see the reindustrialization process starting from downstreaming or value-added creation from our natural resources. So I think this is the thing that we are trying to achieve in the next 5-10 years. Plus, at the same time, Pak Prabowo's preparing the foundation from human resources. Because if you are pushing the growth too much only from the so-called non-human factor, relying so much on technology, then you might face some constraint when your human resources is not capable, to push too much. So I think parallel, in the first 5 to 10 years, there should be strong preparation or foundation of human resources. And at the same time, you have to start moving your economic engine by doing the reindustrialization through value-added creation of natural resources. I think that could be things that we are going to witness during the first 5 or 10 years. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Professor.
My pleasure.
It was a pleasure to listen to your explanations, to your analysis. Thank you for joining us here, and thank you to everyone watching. We hope that you have enjoyed this short discussion and the analytics. And if you would like to see more of what we do, please visit our website at Business Indonesia or EKONID. Please do not hesitate to contact us and give us your feedback on the topics you would like us to cover in our future podcasts. Make sure you like and subscribe this channel. And this has been it from the Archipelago. Best wishes from me, the host, Jan Rönnfeld, and bye-bye.